You should be grateful we even talked to you, Margaret." That's what my son said to me. My own son, the child I raised, fed, clothed, and put through business school with money from the company my husband and I built from nothing. Those words hung in the air like poison. And you know what I did? I smiled. I nodded, and I went completely silent because I already knew something they didn't. Hello, everyone. My name is Margaret Ann Hutchison, and I'm 72 years old. I'm coming to you from my home office in Portland, Oregon, where I'm currently sitting in a building that bears only my name on the deed. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. I'd love to know I'm not alone in what I'm about to share with you. This is the story of how I lost my family and found my backbone. How I learned that silence can be the loudest weapon you possess, and how a lifetime of being underestimated became my greatest advantage. Let me take you back to 1975. I was 22 years old, fresh out of secretarial school, working at a small accounting firm in downtown Portland. That's where I met Robert Hutchison. He was 30, ambitious, and had just inherited a small printing press from his uncle. The business was failing. Robert had passion but no head for numbers, no organizational skills, and no patience for the paperwork that keeps a business alive. I fell in love with him on our third date. We were married 6 months later. Robert wanted to build something, an empire, he used to say. Though back then, our empire was a single printing press in a rented warehouse that smelled like ink and mildew. I kept working at the accounting firm during the day and would come to the warehouse every evening. While Robert handled the creative side and client relationships, I managed everything else. The invoices, the taxes, the payroll when we finally hired our first employee, the negotiations with suppliers who tried to overcharge us because they thought we were just kids playing business. I learned the printing industry inside and out. I studied our competitors. I found cheaper suppliers without sacrificing quality. I created systems for inventory management that saved us thousands. When Robert wanted to expand into commercial printing in 1981, I was the one who ran the numbers, secured the loan, and made sure we could actually afford the new equipment. By 1985, Hutchison Printing wasn't just surviving. We were thriving. We had 20 employees. We'd moved into a real facility. We'd landed contracts with 3 major corporations. Robert was the face of the company, and I was fine with that. He loved the spotlight. I loved the work. We had 2 children. David was born in 1979 and Caroline in 1982. I did what so many women of my generation did. I worked full-time at the business and full-time at home. I packed lunches and attended parent-teacher conferences and made sure homework was done, all while managing the company's finances and operations. Robert used to introduce me as his secret weapon. "This business would collapse without Margaret," he'd say at company gatherings. "She's the brains of this operation." I believed he meant it. Robert died in 2003, a heart attack, sudden and devastating. He was 58 years old. We'd been married for 28 years. The business had grown significantly by then. We had 75 employees and annual revenues in the millions. We'd expanded into digital printing and graphic design services, and according to our legal documents, Robert and I were equal partners, 50-50 ownership. David was 24 when his father died. Caroline was 21. Both of them had worked summer jobs at the company growing up, though neither had shown much interest in the actual business. David had gotten his MBA and was working at a tech startup in Seattle. Caroline was finishing her degree in marketing. At the funeral, David put his arm around me and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll come home and help you run the business. Dad would want that." I should have paid attention to the phrasing, "help me run it," not "help run it with me." David moved back to Portland 2 months later. He wanted to be named Vice President of Operations. He wanted his own office, a significant salary, and a company car. He had big ideas about modernizing everything, despite having 0 experience in the printing industry. I made him start in client relations. I thought he needed to understand our customers, learn the business from the ground up like his father and I had. He was furious. I have an MBA from a top business school, he said. I don't need to work my way up in my own family's company. His own family's company, not our company, his. Caroline joined us in 2005 after graduating. She wanted to run marketing, despite the fact that we already had an excellent marketing director who'd been with us for 8 years. When I explained that she could work in the marketing department and learn from our director, she called me controlling. "You just can't stand the idea of us having real roles here," she said. "You want to keep all the power for yourself." The power I'd built, the systems I'd created, the clients I'd maintained relationships with for decades. But I gave Caroline a position in marketing. I gave David more responsibilities. I thought that's what mothers did. You made room for your children. You helped them grow. I just didn't realize they expected me to shrink. Over the next several years, something changed. Slowly at first, then faster. David started making decisions without consulting me. He'd commit us to contracts I hadn't reviewed. He'd override instructions I'd given to our staff. When I confronted him, he'd say, "Mom, you have to let me actually do my job. You're micromanaging." Micromanaging. That's what he called it when I tried to maintain the standards that had built the business. Caroline began telling staff members that I was old-fashioned and resistant to change. She'd roll her eyes in meetings when I spoke. Once, when I questioned a marketing campaign she'd proposed that seemed off-brand, she said in front of the entire team, "Maybe you just don't understand modern marketing, Mom. Things have changed since the 80s. The 80s, as if I'd stopped learning and adapting the moment I turned 40. David brought in consultants. Expensive consultants who knew nothing about our industry but had impressive credentials. They recommended restructuring the company, creating a new executive hierarchy. One of their suggestions was that I move into a founder advisory role and step back from day-to-day operations. "It's time to think about succession planning," David said. "You're almost 70, Mom. You should be enjoying your retirement, not working yourself to death." I was 68. I swam a mile 3 times a week. My mind was as sharp as it had ever been, and I wasn't ready to be put out to pasture. But they were persistent, both of them. They started having meetings without me. They'd discuss strategy over family dinners and stop talking when I entered the room. They formed a united front on every disagreement. Our board meetings became nightmarish. David and Caroline would present proposals as if they were already decided. When I raised concerns, they'd exchange glances, patient, condescending glances that said, "There goes Mom again." The staff started coming to David and Caroline with questions instead of me. Not because they wanted to, I later learned, but because my children had instructed them to. "Margaret is transitioning into retirement," they'd been told. "Bring operational questions to us." I was being erased from the company I'd built, from the business that wouldn't exist without me. Thanksgiving 2015 was when things came into sharp focus. We were at my house, the house Robert and I had bought in 1987, which I'd kept after his death. I'd spent 2 days preparing the meal. Turkey, stuffing, 3 kinds of pie, all the traditional dishes my children had grown up loving. David brought his wife, Jessica, and their 2 children. Caroline came with her fiancé, Tom. We'd just sat down when David cleared his throat. "Mom, Jessica and I have been talking. We think it's time to discuss your future at the company." At Thanksgiving dinner, he wanted to discuss my future at the company I'd built. "This isn't really the time," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's a family business," Caroline chimed in. "When else would we talk about family business?" Jessica nodded supportively. Tom looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. "We think you should transition to Chairman Emeritus," David continued. "It's an honorary position. You'd still technically be part of the company, but Caroline and I would handle all operations and strategic decisions. You'd be free to travel, spend time with your grandchildren, actually enjoy your life." "I enjoy my life now," I said. "Mom." Caroline's voice had that edge to it. "You're 70 years old." 68. Whatever. The point is, it's time. You've worked hard enough. Let us take over. Let them take over. The business that was legally 50% mine. I'm not ready to retire, I said clearly. When I am, I'll let you know. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. You're being selfish, David said. You're holding us back because you can't let go. I built this company, I said quietly. You and Dad built it, Caroline corrected. And Dad's gone. Now it's our turn. Our turn. As if a business was something you took turns with, like a toy on a playground. The dinner was strained after that. My grandchildren were the only bright spot, oblivious to the tension as they asked me for extra helpings of pie. When everyone left, David didn't hug me goodbye. Caroline kissed my cheek, but it was perfunctory, cold. I cleaned up the kitchen alone and cried for the first time since Robert's funeral. I couldn't sleep that night, or the next night. I kept thinking about David's phrase, transition to chairman emeritus. Something about it felt rehearsed, planned, not like a casual conversation, but a proposal they'd discussed extensively. On Monday, I went to see Leonard Brennan, our company's attorney. Leonard had handled our legal work since 1989. He was 75, sharp as a tack, and one of the few people who remembered when Hutchison Printing was nothing but me, Robert, and a dream. Leonard, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk, I need you to pull all the corporate documents, every single one. I want to review the ownership structure, the bylaws, the succession plans, everything. He looked at me carefully. Margaret, is something wrong? I don't know yet, I said. That's what I'm trying to find out. It took him 3 days to compile everything. When I came back to his office, there was a file box waiting for me. I spent a week going through every document. And that's when I found it. Buried in a contract David had brought to me 8 months earlier, a contract he'd said was just a standard update to our corporate structure, was a clause. A small clause, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. It stipulated that in the event I stepped down or was deemed unable to fulfill my duties as co-owner, my shares would be automatically distributed to my children in equal parts. I'd signed it. He'd presented it with a stack of other documents, all routine business, and I'd trusted him. I'd trusted my son. I remember that day clearly. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March 2015. David had walked into my office with his usual confident stride, carrying a leather portfolio. Mom, I've got some paperwork for you to sign, just routine corporate maintenance stuff. The attorneys recommend we update these every few years to stay compliant. I'd been working on a proposal for a major client. I was distracted, tired. He'd laid out 5 documents, each flagged with those little sticky arrows showing where to sign. He'd explained each one quickly. New banking resolution, updated liability insurance, corporate structure clarification, standard language, standard forms. I'd signed them all, never read them fully, because he was my son and I trusted him. That realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd raised this man, changed his diapers, stayed up with him when he had nightmares, put him through college, and he'd deliberately deceived me to set up a trap. But that wasn't all. I kept digging. I found emails David had printed and filed away, emails between him and Caroline discussing their strategy for getting me out. One email dated July 2015 made my blood run cold. See, Mom's getting more difficult about the modernization initiatives. We need to accelerate the timeline. I'm thinking we push for the advisory role transition by early 2016. We can frame it as honoring her legacy. People respond to that emotional angle. Let me know your thoughts. D. Caroline's response. Agreed. We should start documenting any mistakes she makes. Build a case if she resists. Also, what about her salary? Can we reduce it as part of the transition? They were plotting against me like I was a hostile takeover target, not their mother. I found consultant reports recommending my removal that had never been shared with me. One report, dated September 2015, had a section titled Leadership Transition Recommendations. It suggested that I represented a bottleneck to innovation and that the company would benefit from generational leadership change. The consultant had been paid $15,000 for this report. Company money, my money. I found budget proposals that allocated significantly reduced salary to me while increasing theirs substantially. In one draft budget, my salary was cut by 60%, while David's increased by 40% and Caroline's by 30%. And then I found the calendar entry. On David's calendar, which he synced to the company system, 6 months out, there was an entry that read, "Board meeting. Vote on Margaret's transition to advisory role." It was scheduled, planned, inevitable in their minds. They were planning to force me out, my own children. I sat in Leonard's conference room surrounded by papers, documents, evidence of betrayal, and I felt something shift inside me. The sadness hardened into something else, something cold and focused. I called my longtime assistant, Patricia. She'd been with me for 18 years and had remained loyal, even as David and Caroline tried to sideline me. "Patricia, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to keep it completely confidential. Can you do that?" "Of course, Margaret. What do you need?" "I need copies of every communication David and Caroline have sent through company systems for the past 2 years. Emails, calendar entries, internal memos, everything. Can you access that without them knowing?" There was a pause. "I can. And Margaret, I'm glad you're finally doing something about this. What they've been doing to you isn't right." So she'd noticed. Of course she had. I wondered how many other employees had seen what was happening and felt powerless to stop it. Patricia worked her magic over the next week. She delivered everything on a secure flash drive. I spent hours going through it all. Each email, each dismissive comment about me, each strategic discussion about how to ease me out, added another layer to my resolve. There was an email thread from October where Caroline wrote to David, "She's being stubborn about the Henderson account. I don't know why she's so attached to these old clients. They're not even that profitable anymore." The Henderson account had been one of our first major contracts. Mr. Henderson had trusted us when no one else would. His company had stayed loyal to us for 30 years, and my daughter saw that loyalty as a liability, not an asset. In another email, David wrote about me, "I think we need to consider that she might be showing early signs of cognitive decline. She's been more forgetful lately, more resistant to change. We might need to document this for legal purposes." Cognitive decline. I was forgetting things because I was exhausted from working 60-hour weeks while being undermined at every turn. I was resistant to change because their changes were often poorly thought out and would have damaged client relationships I'd spent decades building. They weren't worried about me. They were building a legal case to declare me incompetent. That's when I knew I couldn't just leave. I couldn't just step down and hand them the business. They didn't deserve it. They hadn't earned it. And they would destroy what Robert and I had built. That night, I sat in my home office, the same office where Robert and I used to do the books together, where we'd planned our expansion, where we dreamed about the future. I was shaking, not with sadness anymore, with rage. I picked up the phone 3 times to call David, to scream at him, to demand an explanation. 3 times I put it back down. If I've learned anything in my 71 years, if I want those watching to understand anything, it's this. Anger is useful, but strategic silence is powerful. Confronting them would accomplish nothing. They'd deny it, gaslight me, make me out to be paranoid or unstable. They'd probably use my emotional reaction as more evidence of my supposed cognitive decline. "See, Mom's becoming erratic. She's making wild accusations. This just proves we need to move forward with the transition." No, I would not give them that ammunition. I made a decision. I would not confront them. I would not give them the satisfaction of my hurt. I would not show my hand. I would go quiet. And I would find another way. The next day at work, I was pleasant, agreeable. When David proposed a new initiative that I knew would waste money, I nodded and said, "That sounds interesting. Go ahead." When Caroline critiqued one of our long-standing client relationships, I simply said, "You might be right. I'll think about that." They looked surprised, but pleased, like they'd finally gotten through to me, like I was finally becoming reasonable. The transformation was immediate and striking. In meetings, I stopped challenging their ideas. When they made decisions I disagreed with, I stayed silent. I started asking them for advice on things I could have handled in my sleep. "David, I'm not sure about this new software system. What do you think we should do?" "Caroline, you understand social media better than I do. Whatever you think is best." I watched them preen. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd finally accepted my place. That week, David stopped by my office. "I'm glad we're all on the same page now, Mom. I know change is hard, but this is good for everyone." I smiled at him. "I trust your judgment, sweetheart." If you could have seen his face, relief and something else, something that looked like triumph. Caroline became bolder. She started making company decisions without even the pretense of consulting me. She redesigned our logo without approval. She committed us to expensive trade show presents I hadn't signed off on. She hired her college friend into a senior marketing position at a salary that made my eyes water. When I raised a mild objection, she patted my hand. "Don't worry about it, Mom. This is what modern companies do. You focus on your transition planning." My transition planning. Like I was a terminal patient preparing for the inevitable. I let her think that. I let them both think that. But every evening I went home and worked. I met with Leonard in secret, always at his house or mine, never at his office where we might be seen. I studied corporate law. I reviewed every document, every clause, every possible avenue, and I started being very, very careful about what I signed. When David brought me documents now, I read every word, every single word. I asked questions. "What exactly does this clause mean, David? Can you explain the purpose of this section?" He'd get impatient. "Mom, it's standard legal language. The attorneys drafted it. You don't need to overthink every detail." But I did. I read everything, and I stopped signing anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. "I need to have my personal attorney review this first," I'd say. "Just to be safe." David would sigh. "You're being paranoid, but fine. Whatever makes you comfortable." He thought I was being a difficult old woman. He had no idea I was protecting myself. During this time, I also started reconnecting with our employees, not the executives, not the people David and Caroline had brought in, but the long-term staff, the people who'd been with us for decades. I had lunch with our production manager, Frank, who'd started as a press operator in 1987. "How are things going, Frank? Really going?" He hesitated, then said carefully, "Things are changing, Margaret. Not all of it good. Some of the new efficiency measures are causing quality issues. We're rushing jobs that should take time." "Tell me more," I said. He did. He told me about corners being cut, about experienced staff being pushed out in favor of cheaper labor, about client complaints that were being hidden from me. David and Caroline's modernization was damaging the company's reputation, but they were cooking the books to hide it. I had coffee with Susan, our longest-serving client service representative. She'd been with us since 1992. "Susan, I need you to be honest with me. How are clients really responding to the changes?" She looked around nervously, then leaned in. "Margaret, we've lost 3 major accounts in the past 6 months. David told the board they chose to leave, but that's not true. They left because we missed deadlines and the quality wasn't what they expected. I tried to tell him, but he said I was being resistant to change. 3 major accounts. That represented almost $1 million in annual revenue, and David had lied to the board about it. I collected information, quietly, carefully. I documented everything, not just the legal case against them, but the business case, the evidence that their leadership was actively harming the company. I also started having conversations with our bank, casual conversations at first, just curious if someone wanted to restructure ownership in a private company, What would that process look like? Our relationship manager, Thomas, had worked with us for 15 years. He knew our financials intimately. Depends on the structure, Margaret. Why do you ask? Just thinking about the future, I said vaguely. Estate planning, that sort of thing. But I was planting seeds, making sure that when the time came, when I needed that loan, the bank would already be thinking about it. I was building my case piece by piece, brick by brick, in complete silence. And David and Caroline had no idea. I became a ghost in my own company. I attended meetings but said little. I reviewed documents but stopped pushing back on decisions. I was present but passive, exactly what they wanted me to be. But every night I went home and worked. I called Leonard Brennan to my house instead of meeting at his office. I told him everything. He was horrified. Margaret, that clause David had you sign, it's potentially fraudulent if he misrepresented its purpose to you. But proving that would mean a court battle with your children. Are you prepared for that? I don't want a court battle, I said. I want the business, all of it. Is there a way? Leonard leaned back in his chair, thinking. Tell me everything about how the company's ownership is currently structured. I did. Robert and I had been 50-50 partners. When he died, his 50% passed to me through his will, so I owned 100%. But then, trying to be a good mother, trying to bring my children into the family business properly, I'd restructured. I'd given them each 20%, retaining 60% for myself. That meant I still had majority control. Barely. The key, Leonard said slowly, is your 60%. As long as you maintain majority ownership, you have the ultimate authority over business decisions, including the power to change the ownership structure, the board composition, everything. But the clause David had me sign, I said, only triggers if you step down or are deemed incapacitated. As long as you remain active and competent, which you clearly are, it's meaningless. He was trying to set up a trap for the future. We spent the next 3 months building a strategy. Leonard consulted with 2 other attorneys specializing in business law and family business disputes. They reviewed every document, every clause, every possible angle, and they found something David and Caroline didn't know about, something even I had forgotten. Back in 1998, when the business was expanding rapidly, Robert and I had put in place a buy-sell agreement. It was a protection mechanism common in partnerships. If one partner wanted out, or if there was an irreconcilable conflict that threatened the business, either party could trigger a buyout process. The agreement specified that the majority owner had first right to buy out minority shareholders at fair market value, determined by an independent business valuation. It was still valid, still legally binding, and I was the majority owner. If you trigger this, Leonard warned me, you'll need to pay them fair market value for their shares, 20% each. Based on our current revenues and assets, we're looking at probably $3 million per child, $6 million total. Do you have access to that kind of capital? I didn't. Not immediately. My assets were tied up in the house, in retirement accounts, in the business itself. But Leonard had a solution. We can structure a loan using the business itself as collateral. The company's creditworthy. You've got decades of strong financial history, and once you own 100%, you can make decisions about compensation, dividends, everything, without anyone blocking you. You could pay off the loan within a few years. It was risky. If the business struggled, I could lose everything. But staying in the current situation meant losing everything anyway, just slower and more painfully. Let's do it, I said. The next step was getting the business valuation. This had to be airtight. Leonard hired a reputable firm that specialized in business valuations for legal proceedings. They spent 6 weeks analyzing every aspect of Hutchison Printing, revenue, assets, client contracts, market position, everything. The valuation came back at $15 million, which meant 20% shares were worth $3 million each, exactly what Leonard had estimated. I took out the loan. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done, putting my financial security on the line at 71 years old. But Leonard had found a bank willing to work with me, partly because the business had such a strong credit history, and partly because I was taking majority control, which actually reduced the bank's risk. While this was happening, I maintained my act at work. Sweet, passive, increasingly forgetful Margaret. I started making small mistakes, nothing catastrophic, but enough to reinforce their narrative that I was slipping. Once I accidentally sent an email to the wrong client. Another time, I showed up to a meeting on the wrong day. David and Caroline exchanged knowing looks. "Mom's really declining," I heard Caroline whisper to her brother. "Perfect. Let them think that." I started talking about maybe traveling more, about how I was tired, about how they were probably right that I should slow down. Their relief was palpable. They thought they were winning. In February 2016, David scheduled that board meeting, the one from his calendar, to discuss Margaret's transition to an advisory role. I told him that sounded fine. I'd be there. Before you continue watching, can I ask you to hit that subscribe button? Because what happens next is the moment I'd been planning for months, and I promise you, it's worth staying for. The board meeting was scheduled for February 18th at 2 in the afternoon. Our board consisted of 5 people: me, David, Carolyn, and 2 outside advisors they'd brought in the previous year. Those advisors had seemed neutral before, but I'd noticed they sided with David and Caroline on every vote. I asked Leonard to attend as corporate counsel. David seemed fine with that, just routine legal presence. The meeting started with standard business. Financial reports, which were strong. We were having a good year. Client updates. Nothing controversial. Then David cleared his throat. Item 7 on the agenda, discussion of company leadership structure. He pulled out a presentation. He'd made slides, professional slides, about succession planning, about my distinguished career, about how it was time for the next generation to lead Hutchison Printing into the future. "Mom," he said, and his voice was gentle, almost pitying, "you've built an incredible legacy, but it's time to let Caroline and me take the company forward. We've prepared a very generous advisory position for you. You'd maintain an office, a reduced salary, and of course, you'd keep your ownership shares. You just wouldn't be involved in day-to-day operations or strategic decisions anymore." "The company needs younger, more dynamic leadership," Caroline added. "The industry is changing. We need people who understand digital transformation, who can pivot quickly." One of the board advisors nodded. "I think this is a wise and respectful transition plan." They were all looking at me, waiting for me to argue, to fight, to make a scene that would prove I was the difficult, unreasonable old woman they'd painted me as. I didn't. I simply turned to Leonard. "I believe you have some documents to distribute." Leonard opened his briefcase and pulled out folders, 5 of them. He placed one in front of each person at the table. "What's this?" David asked, his confidence faltering slightly. "Please open the folders," I said calmly. They did. I watched their faces as they read. Confusion first, then shock, then horror. "This is notice," Leonard said formally, "that Margaret Hutchison, as majority owner of Hutchison Printing, is exercising her rights under the buy-sell agreement established in 1998 to purchase all minority shares of the company." "What?" Caroline's voice was shrill. "You can't do that." "I absolutely can," I said, "and I am. You'll find the independent business valuation in your packets. You're each being offered $3 million for your 20% shares. That's fair market value. The agreement stipulates you have 30 days to accept the offer or negotiate. But if we can't reach an agreement, a judge will enforce the buyout at the appraised value." "Mom." David's face had gone pale. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." "You're stealing our inheritance." Caroline stood up, her chair scraping loudly. "Your inheritance?" I kept my voice level. "I gave you those shares. Generously. Perhaps too generously, as it turns out. But this company isn't your inheritance, Caroline. It's my life's work. mine and your father's, and I'm not ready to hand it over to people who've spent the last year trying to force me out." "We were trying to help you," David insisted. "Help me?" I pulled out my own folder. "Is that what you call the emails where you discussed handling the Margaret problem? The consultant reports you commissioned that recommended my removal but never shared with me. The clause you slipped into documents claiming it was routine, when it was actually designed to strip my shares if you could get me declared incapacitated?" The room went silent. "You were trying to steal my company," I said. "My company? Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was that far gone?" "This is insane," David said, but his voice had no strength behind it. "We're your children." "Yes, you are, which is why I gave you opportunities, positions, ownership in this company, and you repaid me by trying to push me out like I was nothing, like I hadn't spent 40 years building this business, like I was just some obstacle in your way." I stood up. "You told me I should be grateful you even talked to me. Do you remember that, David? At the Christmas party last year, you said I should be grateful. For what? For being tolerated by my own son in the business I built." He had the grace to look ashamed, but only for a moment. "You'll regret this," Caroline hissed. "We'll fight it. We'll tie this up in court for years." Leonard spoke up. "You're welcome to try, but the buy-sell agreement is ironclad. We've had 3 attorneys review it. You will lose, and you'll spend a fortune in legal fees, and the final result will be exactly the same. You'll be bought out at fair market value. The only question is whether you want to accept the offer now or waste time and money fighting the inevitable." They fought it. Of course they did. They hired their own attorneys. They filed motions. They tried to argue I was acting out of spite, that the buyout wasn't in good faith, that I was mentally incompetent. That last one particularly enraged me. I submitted to a full neurological evaluation just to prove them wrong. The doctor's report said I had the cognitive function of someone 20 years younger. 4 months later, in June 2016, a judge upheld the buyout. David and Caroline were each paid $3 million for their shares. They stopped speaking to me entirely. I own 100% of Hutchison Printing now. I paid off the loan in 3 years, ahead of schedule. I promoted several long-term employees into leadership positions, people who'd been overlooked while my children played at being executives. The company is more profitable now than it's ever been. My grandchildren still visit sometimes, though less often. David and Caroline have tried to turn them against me, but teenagers are smart. They ask questions. They want to understand. I tell them the truth, age appropriately, and let them draw their own conclusions. Do I wish things had been different? Of course. I wish my children had valued me. I wish they'd seen me as a partner instead of an impediment. I wish I could have handed them the business with pride instead of having to take it back by force. But I don't regret what I did. Not for a second. This is Margaret Ann Hutchison, signing off from the office that bears my name, only my name, and I earned every letter of it.